How do you feel about your garage, Joe?
I don't have a garage.
You clearly do.
But if I did, I'd probably play music in it. That goes like... Bah, 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 bah.
Insert your 32-minute EP advert.
Yeah, man. Check the Facebook page, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sunday Jamz with Joe,
Hello.
Shak, which is me, and Sam.
Hi, everyone.
And today we are on episode 6 of Album Club. Album Club is a weekly segment that we do where one of the three of us brings forth an album that the other two haven't listened to. We sit with it for a week and then we chat about it. And today it was Sam's second album, Joe's Garage Part 1 by Frank Zappa. So let's chat. So, Sam, context us up about this album.
All right, so Joe's Garage was released in 1979 and is, as described by the liner notes, a stupid story about how the government is going to try and do away with music, a prime cause of unwanted mass behaviour. And if the plot of the story seems just a little preposterous, and if the idea of the central scrutinizer enforcing laws that haven't been passed yet makes you giggle, just be glad you don't live in one of the cheerful little countries where, at this very moment, music is either severely restricted or, as it is in Iran, totally illegal.
That's exactly what the liner notes say.
That is exactly what the liner notes say, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And this album was in response to...
It was in response to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, in which rock music was made illegal. But it's funny that a lot of these themes that are discussed on here are so easily translatable to a later event in Zappa's life in the mid-80s, in where he confronts Al Gore and other senators and parents with regards to the parental advisory label.
Yeah. It was mainly typical, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The spearhead of that foolishness.
So my first highlight is the title track of this album, Joe's Garage. I really like how genius this is on a musical level, in that it's referred to in the lyrics as well. The majority of the instrumentation here is really just kind of simple and laid back in its chord progression or whatever. So that when you do get these isolated solo blemishes or whatever, they, such as the saxophone or the bending of the string, they have a lot more power behind them than they would normally. And I like that they've taken this kind of cliche band narrative of, you know, the band getting together, playing in the garage, but knowing that this story is brought to us by the character of the central scrutinizer, it just makes the whole thing seem a lot more farcical and kind of ironically enjoyable, in my opinion. And the non-serious nature of just the whole song, it just makes it far more enjoyable than it would be normally, especially when the sound of the song that Joe describes, when it dramatically changes, like you only get a chance to play a song that goes like, and then you get these really jokey sounding like bong bong, bong sounds, and the jam at the end is really great too. The drums on this track steal it for me.
There are parts in this album where I think I like it a lot more, but the idea of the simplicity being juxtaposed with Zappa's usual brand of very complex playing and like his kind of his signature jazziness, so when it's put aside the very simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, I think it works better in later tracks, maybe, but I can see what you mean here. The little jammy parts, like when you get the you kind of get like a peek into the story and into the music that they're making, like Joe and Larry, I think it is. And they're just like, they sound bad, but they're obviously supposed to sound bad because it's like they're supposed to be a really amateurish, band, and So I think it's one of those things where it has a kind of charm to it, but it's not necessarily something I enjoy listening to. Those parts, especially, it's not really something I enjoy. Okay. Maybe it's kind of not intended. You could argue it's not intended to be enjoyed, but yeah. But what I do like about this song. I actually like his delivery of the story in the verses. and I didn't like it on first listen at all. But I think because on first listen I wasn't really paying attention to the lyrics, and then on second listen I did a much deeper lyrical kind of engagement with it. When you kind of get into the story, it's definitely much more kind of rewarding experience, the verses. So I do enjoy the verses and his delivery of those verses for sure.
How do you feel about your garage, Joe?
I don't have a garage,
You clearly do.
but if I did, I'd probably play music in it. That goes like bang, 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 bang.
Insert your 32-minute EP advert.
Yeah, man. Check the Facebook page, everyone. But it's not a highlight for me because I don't know. I feel like this song's basically just like an introduction of the characters, and it just kind of sets the scene that will later go on to properly like satirize all of the people he's set out to go after by doing this album. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's fair.
Like, and I think it acts as like a proper introduction to a lot of the goofy shit that's going to come in as well. Like, you know, like the woman screaming at them to turn it down and everything. And all the other characters, like the police come in and shit.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this just kind of sets you up for where the album's going.
And it's even more so a prelude because of the massive time jump that happens between this song and the rest of the album.
Yeah.
So, like, in that sense, it feels very much like a detached introduction to the whole story because, like, the years were rolling by, as he says at the end of the song, and then next song, we're, like, way into the future. So, yeah.
My first highlight on the album, it's probably Crew Slut.
Nice.
Crew Slut.
Because I really just like the instrumental and just the vibe. And just it's probably one of the funnier tracks on the album as well. In my opinion, because you know, just the guy's voice when he's like, "It's a way of life."
Yeah,
it just I don't know. I just found that really fun.
Yeah, Zappa's kind of satirizing of the kind of corporate slogans that you'd hear, like "Coke, love life."
I swear, "It's a way of life" is on like almost every track on this fucking album. He says it so much.
Yeah, as is the white zone is for loading and unloading.
Yeah.
There's some really cool, interesting things with Crew Slut. Like, for one, I think the little solo in this is actually really great. Like, it's quite subtle, but it still has some kind of technicality in it. And at this point, it was one of the most... When I got to Crew Slut, it was one of the most instrumentally engaging parts, I think. It's also really interesting that there's this kind of clangy psychedelic guitar going on, which feels quite strangely placed in the song. You know, it sounds like guitars straight off of like Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's or something, which is really strange because it's kind of like it's not the atmosphere you'd expect in terms of the guitar tones that he's using. And in terms of the vocals, I like the way he delivers the whole "be a Crew Slut" thing. That line is the bit I like the most. The other vocals, I'm not as much keen on, but
okay.
But that one, I like that.
I like the verses a lot. The verses are just really catchy to me. The way they're sung and...
See, I think my favourite part about this track is the kind of odd percussive sound that you particularly get in the opening verse, and it's reflective of the kind of industrial towns that he's mentioning. Like, I feel like the palette that Zappa uses in a lot of these songs is to create atmosphere and environment as much as it is to be musical, and I feel like it works well here. The harmonica on this track as well, I feel like it really shines, especially in the instrumental break where whoever's playing that harmonica just goes absolutely mad on it.
Yeah, usually I'm not a big fan of a harmonica on a track, but I did enjoy it on this.
Yeah. And in terms of lyrics, it looks just like a Telefunken U-47 is the best musical dildo analogy I think I'll ever hear.
It's dumb. At this point, though, one thing was just that coming fresh off of from when I got to this point in the album, especially the first time, you know, because the main album I know from Frank Zappa is Hot Rats, and I really love that album.
Okay, yeah.
It felt like it was missing at this point in the track list, and at this point in the track list was missing what I loved about Frank Zappa, which is these kind of crazily complex but really kind of rich and cool solos and instrumental passages that he creates, and a lot of this has gone for especially in the first half, has gone for the more simpler angle, which I was just thinking when I got to this point. Like it's not really playing to his strengths that much.
Mm-hmm.
The first time you get a taste of the complexity, funnily enough, is in Fembot in a wet t-shirt.
That's a highlight for me.
Yeah,
Same.
right, okay. So
Same.
that works then.
Mhm.
Because it does have some really great guitar work in it. It has this really progressive kind of solo, and there's like time signatures jumping around and stuff. And this is I think is where the juxtaposition between the complexity and the simplicity is done better than on Joe's Garage, in my opinion. Yeah, because it's really obvious, because he puts so much effort into the solo that he creates, as opposed to the kind of absurd simplicity of the story and the non-complex bit of the song. So
Yeah.
I think that worked.
I like how it starts. It sounds like it's the intro theme to some like old ass game show or something on TV.
Yeah.
With like these bright pianos and stuff. And there's like a proggy bit in this song almost that comes up on other songs as well. That I thought was really cool sounding. It was like
Yeah, that's what I meant with the time
that bit's
signatures and
really
stuff.
cool. Yeah, that comes up again on the bus as well.
Yeah.
I love the sounds on this track. Like in the opening track, the Central Scrutinizer, you get the kind of xylophone and off-sounding keys, and they make a return here, and they just make the whole track, like its narrative, etc., just sound so ridiculous and just offbeat and just great and fun to listen to on a musical and narrative level.
Is that the bit with the quacking?
Yeah.
Central Scrutinizer as well.
I love the spoken word section of this track as well.
Yes.
It's probably like the funniest in terms of narrative and the delivery of that narrative. It's the funniest part of it, in my opinion. So kind of choice cuts from that. You get, yeah, I know your father is waiting for you in the tool shed, mammalian protuberances, stupid-looking white sort of male person's conservative kind of middle-of-the-road cotton undergarment to describe a t-shirt. Like, I feel like there's almost an author trapped in Zappa that wants to write a book, but of course he'd never do that.
Maybe. It is quite funny. It's also added that it's more funny, like, because of the characters. And there is a subtle, like, darkness to it.
Absolutely.
Because it talks about how, like, she'd been, like, almost, like, trained to be this way from her days in the church when she was younger. And it's, like, it kind of alludes to, like, potential, like, sexual abuse in the church. And also the fact that he's a father who is now Buddy Jones, the fucking guy who commentates the wet t-shirt contest, and he used to be like a pastor, a priest, or whatever. It's just like there's an added funniness and darkness in that in the story, and I think the story really elevated the album, because on my first listen I was like, it was a lot lower of a score than the score it will probably end up with now.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
when you take in the story, it does kind of make it more the bits that at first you were like, what the fuck is going on, are more palatable, I suppose.
I've got written down that I feel like the music isn't really the focus of the album for the most part, even though there are parts that are like amazingly played. Like, I feel like it's the lyrics and the message and their like satirical delivery that is the real focus.
As someone that's kind of more widely listened to Zappa, I feel like that's a fair assertion. And people kind of describe Zappa in two ways. There's Zappa the musician and there's Zappa the satirist. And I think very much on this album he embodies his satirical nature as opposed to his musical one.
Right, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And that's why I found it kind of difficult to write notes for this album as well, because a lot of the time, like, the music is taking the back seat. So it's like I don't know. A lot of the time, I didn't have that much to write in terms of the actual instrumental.
So I guess that leads me on nicely to my next highlight, which is purely instrumental, which is On the Bus.
Yeah, I think On the Bus is probably my biggest highlight on the album. And the main reason for that is because I'm much more into Zappa, the instrumentalist, than Zappa the satiricist, because he has like one of the most incredible ways of composing instrumental sections like I've ever heard, especially on Hot Rats. But also On the Bus is another example of that, of how great he is at kind of putting together these really soulful guitar solos. Guitar solos have so much like character in them, and then the solo breaks and you get this really jazzy kind of funky instrumentation as well, that kind of repeats as it fades out. It's definitely what I like about Zappa in a song, So it kind of had to be my highlight, because that's kind of like I guess that's what I was looking for, especially on my first listen. It was what I was looking for going into the album, and still on further listens, it still stayed at the top, really, just because I think he's just amazing at writing vocalless music.
Yeah, man. His guitar work is just legendary at this point. And I feel like on this track it's one of the moments where I feel his guitar work really shines. Like, Steve Vai features on this track as well.
Okay.
And to what extent he plays or had influence on the writing of this track, I don't know. But all I know is that, like, I think it's like 4.5 minutes, this track. For the 4.5 minutes, like, it could be very easy to get distracted and lose interest within a instrumental piece. But I was just like enamored.
Not Zappa, man.
Yeah.
No, like I said with Hot Rats, like there's only one song on that has any vocals on it, right? And like that is so engaging an album, So,
but in terms of this track, the second half is probably my favourite. After the Scrutinizer interjects with the next bit of narrative exposition, where the drums kind of amp up and the song slows down into what will be, I'm sure, a highlight for all of us. But Joe, do you have anything to say about On the Bus? Basically
just echoing what you said, the incredible guitar playing, because Steve Vai is just a bit of a legend when it comes to that. And there's like Latin rhythms as well throughout a lot of it that reminded me of like desert rock and like Black Magic Woman, like Santana vibes.
Oh, yeah. That's a good comparison.
I got a lot of that on this. But yeah, definitely a highlight also.
So, as I was saying, it leads into another track, which I'm sure would be a highlight for all of us.
Definitely. It does tell the story of exactly why it hurts when he pees.
Yeah, easy highlight for sure.
This song is hilarious, man.
The vocal melody is just so great.
It's so catchy, man.
It's insanely catchy. The deepness in his vocals is just really like powerful in this kind of crazy way. It kind of reminds me of, like, almost kind of reminds me of like the tone he sings in. Almost kind of reminds me of like almost Black Sabbath-y type vocals. Not when he breaks into the falsetto in little bits, obviously, but it's that kind of monotone, but it still has a lot of power in it. I don't know, it's weird. But yeah, it's great. It's great.
I feel like by this... Oh, go on, carry on.
I was going to say another reason why I really love this song is because I'll get into this when we talk about the lowlights, but I think it has one of the most focused bits of the story, in a sense. Lyrically, it's very focused. It's very straightforward in terms of the content of the story. It's very memorable. It's very funny and appealing.
It's very it's very immediately funny.
Immediate, yeah. And so I think lyrically it was one of the most vivid and just one of the best parts of the story, really.
What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say, by this point in the album, I feel like he's done most of the satirizing he was going to do. And so this and the last song, if we're counting Lucille as the last song, they're both like way more conventional. They're like way more like songs with like actual catchy melodies and no spoken word or any of that. And it, like this song, like I feel like it's mainly just like a catchy, funny, short song, like. And then Lucille, like we'll go on to talk about that, but that's quite simple as well, I felt.
And that's a cover as well of an actual like non-comedy song.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
I've got it written down. Like there's not really any fun. It's like the least funny song on the album.
But
just
like,
happens.
In terms of making this song even funnier than the lyrics already make it and Zappa's vocal delivery do. I've talked about Zappa kind of creating environmental or atmospheric palettes with the music, and I feel like there's a particular moment on this song where Joe is crying out in pain while he's peeing.
What?
And there's like this really kind of epic backing instrumentation that accompanies it with like chimes and choir vocals.
Yeah, the choral vocals.
Yeah. It's just brilliant. And
then that bursts into "My balls feel like a pair of maracas." Like, yeah,
So good.
it's really good.
And yeah, you get the outro as well, which, you know, you get that falsetto-y pee. And, you know, the whole album just comes to a huge crescendo.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go into Lucille's
Mess My Mind.
Yeah.
I think this song is, I'd say, might be a highlight. Like it's on the border of being a midlight and a highlight.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's a cool, you know, chill song. I think it's probably one of the highlights of his voice, one of the high moments of his kind of vocal delivery. I really like the blemishes of the keys, the little playful keys, the playful guitars that go through it. It's kind of weird that he chose this kind of like reggae rhythm. I don't know if that was in the original because I haven't listened to the original. But it has got this reggae rhythm section going through the whole thing. Yeah, it's an interesting song. It's not silly at all. It's quite emotional, but it's still kind of silly. Like when you place it into the story, it's still kind of silly, you know, because it's like he's trying to reconcile the fact that she gave him an STD by, like, you know, with this whole song. This whole song is kind of a meditation on his like ridiculous relationship with Lucille. So yeah, it's kind of like retrospectively funny, which is cool. Yeah, it's a good song. It's definitely a good song.
Any thoughts, Joe?
I enjoyed it quite a lot. I like the kind of the slow kind of 70s soul R&B vibe with that kind of reggae strum guitar behind it. I just like how relaxed it is. And like Shakeel said, it does have that funniness when put next to all of the other songs. It's like, where did this even come from? Like,
yeah. It's definitely a kind of somber... I felt that it was a bit drowsy almost in its atmosphere. But in terms of the rest of the album, because this isn't like the final track, but it's the final musical track that we get.
It's basically just an outro that comes after this.
Yeah. And I feel like the emotion that Ike Willis, who's the vocalist on this track, puts into his vocals, you know, despite the absurdity that it is literally him crying over the fact that he has gonna caca-cacas. Combined with the postlude that we get of, you know, the central scrutinizer basically saying like Joe could not do anything after this, it's all music's fault. It's both made funnier and sadder at the same time. In terms of a general thing, I really like Zappa as the central scrutinizer throughout this. He's probably my favourite character in the album.
I thought it was quite a funny introduction to the album. It wasn't what I was expecting. It was like he just sounds like this like creepy like government spy character who's like he like represents all of the people that he's basically going against by making the album. It's just super dumb.
I felt like it was okay the first bit, but I felt like it started to wear on me throughout the album. Like I felt like I could have done without him, even though he's kind of important to keep you going with the story. He's not necessarily enjoyable. I don't look forward to his parts. You know, they kind of just annoy me, and it kind of makes me want to skip them when they come in.
Okay.
So he's definitely not, for me, he's not a high point. Like I understand his kind of necessity in the album, but it's not really something I like. Which I guess we can. Should we just segue into the low parts?
Yeah, I don't have any particular highlights that I want to talk about anymore.
Okay, so that's one of my low points. A lot of my low points are general. There's still an overall disappointment with me with this album because of what it is. Like, even though I think it does a perfectly fine job of achieving what it's trying to achieve, there's still a lack of stuff like On the Bus. There's still a lack of what I think Zappa is good at, or like what he shines at. Like, so a lot of people would say Zappa shines as this kind of satirical, character and doing this satirical music. I'd say he does a fine job of it, but to me, it doesn't compare to how much he shines in his proggy, jazzy, like super expansive instrumental, like masterful things that he writes. So, like, for me, I just miss having that kind of meat of that kind of instrumental meat in the album, especially on the A side of the album. I think I would just want more to engage me, because in the end of the day, it's still music. Like, there's no other way around it. He's released an album. This is music. I either want to listen to it or I don't want to listen to it. Like, you can't get so meta from music that it's I mean, there are things more meta than this that are still music, So it's like, it still has to deliver to my ears something I want to listen to, and there's not enough that interests me, especially in the A side, especially in songs like Joe's Garage and Catholic Girls and kind of Cruise Slut as well. That just really keeps me engaged in the songs, because they're so simple when it comes to the instruments and stuff like that.
Like, for some, like Joe's Garage is an album that they could very much do without, because, like they are exclusively within the camp that Zappa should just shut up and play his guitar, which is an album that he did eventually release called just that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's somewhere in the middle. So on Apostrophe, you get tracks like Don't Eat the Yellow Snow and Cosmic Debris, which are both silly, but also really engaging from an instrumental standpoint. And I think it's a fair criticism. I can see how some people would say that the narrative on this album perhaps gets a little bit too in the way of everything else.
That would lead me to my next criticism.
I was going to say that while you were talking about songs like Don't Eat the Yellow Snow and like the more silly side, that is what kind of put me off checking out more Frank Zappa, because I generally don't really enjoy silly stuff. So I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by the kind of humor on this album. Like, it's not actually that silly, really. Like, there's like funny, like lewd jokes and like, but it's satirical. It's not just like weird, silly, just bizarre jokes.
Which is what put you off the Mollusk a little bit, didn't it? In how absurd it was at times. Just
how silly it sounds sometimes. The silliness just really does not. Well,
I definitely, and I think Shakeel will echo this, recommend that if you're a bit more warm to Zappa by this, you should listen to Hot Rats.
Yeah, I think I will. Knowing that it's mostly instrumental, that's definitely like a
plus, because it will completely remove that slight problem you have.
It's a bit of a safety net thing.
But yeah, okay, so segueing into another one of my problems with this album, I think the story is very convoluted. Like, I think it's it's like unnecessarily, like, there's too much going on with the story, and I don't think there's any need. Like, I don't think anything in the story, in terms of the message, necessitates this much, like, these many characters and stuff, and it's kind of like, it's kind of enjoyable to go along with when I'm reading it, but I'm not going to be reading it every time I listen to it. So it's and then you have the liner notes, which basically you also need just to follow the story. And I understand, like, it's the whole thing. I understand it's supposed to be ridiculous. It's supposed to be overly convoluted. But the fact that it's supposed to be convoluted doesn't mean it's not convoluted. It's still convoluted. It's still not. It's still annoying to have to, like, keep along with this really over the top complex story, and that all adds into the scrutinizer as well, which is just another added, like, feature to the story that I think is again, he's kind of needed, but you could still craft another story where he wasn't needed. So he's not needed in a really fundamental sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's almost a bit pretentious. Like I think this album. It's not that obviously it's not dumb. I think it's a bit pretentious in what it kind of expects of the listener to engage with the story. It expects them to want to read all this liner note shit that I would never want to read in any other context other than the fact that you kind of have to with this album. So I'd say it's a bit pretentious. The story, funnily enough, even though it's such a dumb, simple story.
I think what you've said is fair. Like, satire is something that can be divisive for a lot of people, and one of the things that I still have while listening to this album is something that is prevalent throughout any kind of satire. In the track "Catholic Girls," it's still funny, right, to me, but the criticism of the Catholic Church and Catholic girls is aged now because you know, at the time the church would have had a much bigger presence within society, whereas now it's taken a backseat. So, and
this was prior to the big break of the story, the big Catholic scat priest scandal and all that shit. This is when it was more hearsay, I think, and it was before, like, because the big story breaks didn't happen until like the 90s, I think, or like the early 2000s. That's when the big newspaper explosion with the Catholic priest scandal happened.
Yeah.
So
Exposing.
so when you're talking 79, you're talking like people know about it, but it's not. It's kind of under the rags type thing. So
some of the bite is somewhat lost. You know, and the lewd jokes within this, whilst the humour, you know, their quality of humour is still retained, the bite of the lewdness has also diminished as well.
Some of the jokes gone.
Because, you know, as I mentioned in the beginning, with the board that comes into effect later in the 80s with Al Gore, I think Zappa and others were described as porn rock or something like that because of how many lewd associations they had within their lyrics.
AC/DC, all those kind of bands. Yeah.
So that isn't there so much anymore when lewdness is kind of par for the course in modern music.
Yeah. And some of the jokes, they feel a little dated. Like at times, there are definitely points where I was like, "That's not really funny anymore." But I could see why it would be funny in its time.
It does come across a bit daddish.
Yeah, there is definitely elements of dad rock to this.
But I feel like that's just Frank Zappa, though.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
It's very daddish.
Okay, let's get into Catholic Girls, because this is an extreme low light for me.
Wow.
For a lot of reasons. First one being, because it's funny, because last week we were talking about the mollusk and talk about the voices. I've never heard a voice as fucking stupid as the one that says Catholic Girl.
The really nasally one.
Catholic Girl is the worst thing I think I've ever heard. In terms of like, it's totally fine that it's supposed to be kind of crap. Like, it's obviously supposed to not be good. It's not like, you know, to mull over and enjoy. It's supposed to be like this ridiculous, stupid voice. So again, it's not like I'm taking shots at him with this for missing the mark.
But it got to the point of irritation.
It's horrible to listen to. Yeah, it was horrible on the first. After the third one, I was like, there would never be a scenario ever in the future where I wouldn't skip this track. Or I would skip this track all day. And I don't skip tracks, but I would skip this track all day. You know, and then the way it's juxtaposed with this ridiculous like vocal pop 50s style.
It's amazing. I love the lounge verse.
Oh no, it's just so silly the way they've done that. The way he's I don't know. Just the concept behind doing that also just irritates me because it's just so like doesn't go together at all. But like, I feel again, it's almost like it's not supposed to go together, you know.
It's weird that you're rebelling against silly voices more than I am.
Yeah, it's an odd coincidence. For me, like, I can definitely, like, Catholic Girls is probably my least favourite track on the album, but I still like it. notably, I think the instruments here are awesome. As for most of the album, they are. I think the interlude after the lyric "Where are they now? Did they all take the vow?" With the banjo and drums, as well as the bass guitar, is one of my favourite instrumental bits on the album.
I think the main reason why, like Joe says, it's weird that I'm the one who's protesting about silly vocals now. The main difference for me between something like the Mollusk and something like this was what I was saying before, which is this is actual comedy rock, and the Mollusk isn't. It's just absurd,
right?
And I don't like comedy rock. I don't like comedy music. Like it's like the hardest barrier for me to overcome is when people are trying to be funny in music, and it's just like it totally conflicts with why I want to listen to music and like how I engage with music. So it's kind of like the hardest genre for me to get on board with. And songs like Catholic Girls, it's just like pure comedy rock music or comedy music. Like it's not meant to be taken seriously at all. Like Cleve doesn't want it to be taken seriously. So it's just like my relationship to the song is just already skewed from the get-go. And I also don't like the sounds also kind of irk me and grate on me, on top of that. And it's the same with Cruise Slut as well. It's why I couldn't call Cruise Slut a highlight, because again, it's comical, it's over the top. I don't like the voices in the verses either.
Okay.
They're a bit like melodramatic and the like the spoken bits between when he says "be a cruise slut" and then you get these stupid conversations.
I love those bits, man.
Again, it's comedy music, and it's just like, if it was fucking like, if it had me on the floor dying of laughter, then maybe, but it's not that funny really for me anyway. It's like I get the genre of comedy that he's coming at. I know I get the time, I get the era and the kind of comedy that he would have wanted to portray in that era. And not all of his comedy is dated here. Some of his comedy, there is still definitely funny bits here.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in terms of like a lot of parts in like say Cruise Slut, I don't find it really funny.
Okay.
It's like there are comedy acts that I go to laugh, and I actually find funny, like fucking like stupid like Flight of the Conchord songs, or like John the Joey, or however you say his name.
Yeah.
And some Lonely Island, like early Lonely Island. And I go to that to laugh, and I don't really critically think about it. And when I do critically think about it, it doesn't go well. So I kind of just keep it on a laugh level. But I mean, this is Frank Zappa. I'm not just gonna like just
give
laugh and turn it off, in a sense. You know what I mean? Like you might do with like a song like "Jizz in My Pants." You just gotta laugh, and then next song. But you don't want to do that with Frank Zappa, because he's a smart guy and he makes really good music. So it's just a really barrier for me. I'd say. Yeah. Same with bits in Joe's Garage, like I said, with those bits when you hear the band play and it's just so bad, and it's supposed to be bad, but it's still bad. It's so that kind of wraps up another one of my criticisms, which I think this album is insanely lopsided to the B-side. I think all of the best songs are from Fembot downwards.
I would agree. I prefer the B-side of this album.
And the A-side really doesn't do it for me personally. Okay, so general wrap-up thoughts. I think this album there is a cleverness to this album, and there are definitely songs I like, but it's a bit too simple. It's a bit convoluted. It's a bit pretentious, and there's definitely problems for me with it. It's lopsided to one side as well. So I definitely have quite a few problems with it, but there's still a bit to like as well. So highlights would definitely be On the Bus and Why Does It Hurt When I Pee? And lowlights would be Cruisler and Catholic Girls. And also The Central Scrutinizer, the first song as well.
Okay.
If you can call it a song. But yeah, I think it is kind of a song. So yeah. And overall score, when I first listened to it, it was like a low 5. But now I would say it's like a 6, like probably like a I'm going to say a high 6. I'll give it a high 6, like a 6.5.
I was pleasantly surprised, as I said, because I was only really familiar with Zappa's really silly stuff, although I had heard Why Does It Hurt When I Pee before. But when you don't have the context of the album, that's another just like silly song. But no, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. My highlights would be Crew Slut, Fembart in a wet t-shirt, On the Bus, and Why Does It Hurt When I Pee. And I don't think I have any lowlights. Like all the other songs, like Central Scrutinizer, Joe's Garage, Catholic Girls, and Lucille. Like I enjoyed them all, like for their own merits. Like they all had things I liked.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they maybe they didn't gel with me as well as the other ones.
Mm.
And for a rating, I think I'd give it a low 7.
Okay,
just like a flat 7.
For me, this is one of Zappa's better albums because I feel like this is one of the albums where he strikes a good balance between his role as a musician and his role as a satirist.
It's probably my favourite of his satirical works, and whilst there are problems here in terms of dated humour and, you know, narrative obtuseness, there's still a lot to really like here, in my opinion. And, you know, if you can get on board on Zappa's kind of just wacky mindset and just let him run wild with him, then I'm sure you'll find lots to enjoy here as well. Highlights for me include Joe's Garage, Fembot in a wet t-shirt, On the Bus, and Why Does It Hurt When I Pee? And I don't have any lowlights. I think all the tracks on here are at least solid, but if I had to pick a weaker track, it would be Catholic Girls. And in terms of a score, I think this album is a solid 8. In terms of what I thought you guys were going to feel when we heard this album, I thought Joe was going to absolutely hate this album. Which is interesting, because I thought that he'd much prefer the Mollusk.
I feel like I do much prefer the Mollusk.
Mm.
I feel like the good moments on the Mollusk absolutely destroy like certain songs on that album.
Mm-hmm.
Are like songs I will come back to time and time again. When I don't think I'll listen to this album outside of like listening to it as like a whole, which won't be often.
Yeah, that's fair. And I knew that humour was going to be a barrier for both of you, but it seems that, you know, I kind of expected that to be a major factor in why Joe wouldn't like this album. I think I underestimated how much of a factor it would be with you, Shakeel. And I knew that you were a fan of Hot Rats, so I'm glad that On the Bus was a hit for you, because I knew it would be. But, you know,
Is there any songs in particular that you thought I would like a lot more?
No, not really. I feel like everything you've said has been pretty grounded. Maybe a bit more towards Lucille has messed my mind up. I thought you'd prefer a little more, but
It's cool.
Yeah, everything you said about it was fair. But yeah, there wasn't a huge surprise except for how much Joe did end up enjoying the album. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought he'd dislike it more as well.
Maybe I'm changing. You're changing me by making me listen to all these dumb albums.
In a few years, you're going to be a fucking clown in some circus. Fat nose. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you guys have listened to Joe's Garage, Part 1, what do you think of it? Do you really like it? Do you not like it that much? Do you think Zappa should shut up and play guitar? Or do you think he should keep making weird jokes? Let us know in the comments. Also, please hit that juicy big red sub button that you see below the video.
Subscribe!
Appreciate it. And also share this video anywhere you feel like sharing it. Tune in next week for Joe's pick, and that will be Wolves in the Throne Room, Diadem of 12 Stars, our first extreme metal album. See you next week. Goodbye.